Don't we live in some very interesting times? This is Oz here. I'm obviously part of KCTVMEDIA.com, so if you want to pop into our site anytime, please do so, because we'll obviously be extending and adding to the site as we develop. But I want to draw your attention to this particular story that has come about in the last 2 or 3 months off a very interesting website called bbc5.tv, and Jane Burgermeister investigates the swine flu pandemic. Is it a con? Well, the next 60 minutes or so will explain a lot of information, so get some paper and a pen and take some notes. But we want to make sure that you understand that the whole principle here is to expose truth. That's what we're about, and that's what we're going to be doing. And this particular website, alongside many other websites and video clips we're going to provide today, will be a benefit to you and your friends and colleagues, I'm sure. So take a look at the KCTV Media site. We will be providing information of how you can get your complimentary 8 hours plus information with this as well. So we look forward to hearing from you soon.
For waiting to listen to this. I did do English at Edinburgh University, a useless subject, but I ended up working in a medical journal in Austria, and that's how I came to be familiar with the medical world. And then I was writing for the British Medical Journal and Reuters and various other publications like The Scientist. And that's why when I heard in February of this year that 72 kilos of vaccine material had been contaminated with the live bird flu virus by Baxter in Austria, I knew there was a big problem, and I started filing criminal charges. But what I'd like to talk about this evening is how the media is working together with the pharmaceutical companies to conceal from people what's really going on. And I just want to say that thanks to the independent media, we were able to do what previous generations could never have hoped to do. We can research facts, treaties and documents related to government actions and events for ourselves. And we can see today more clearly than at any time before in history the discrepancy between what is contained in those documents, treaties and regulations, and what the mainstream media and the governments is telling us is contained in these documents. For the first time, we can comprehend the scale and the nature of the monstrous and ruthless conspiracy that John F. Kennedy was talking about in 1961, before he was assassinated. Now, in 1961, this New World Order conspiracy was a vague notion, much like the contours of an island seen far off on the horizon remain indistinct and unclear. Today in 2009, thanks to the information we can obtain through the independent media and by our own original research, we have reached the shores, so to speak, of that island, and we can see very clearly every single feature, every single cliff and beach and palm tree. We can really understand now how our political and economic systems are working and who is running them. And this awareness is growing very rapidly. It's grown enormously in the past year or so, and it's growing every single day. And the result is that the knowledge imbalance that has put humanity and us at a disadvantage for decades is now being redressed. and this is due to the emergence of the new independent and critical sources of information made possible by the invention of the internet and other communication and information technologies. Our knowledge of the New World Order, oh dear, I'm reading this and it's slipped all the way down. Let's see. Our knowledge of the New World Order is so detailed that we are able to identify the agents of this group as they sit on the boards of mainstream media companies, pharmaceutical companies, banks, and government bodies. And we can see how they're working together in a coordinated and synchronized way to obtain their objective, which is actually global government. Now, this global government can only be established on the basis of the negation of the power of the rest of the people of the world, and that is ourselves. The establishment of a new world or government by a few at the expense of 6 billion people is an inherently violent act. In fact, it involves a violence on a scale never seen before. It involves a drastic reduction in the world's population by means of artificially created diseases, wars and famines, by taxes and the formation of totalitarian regimes. Nation-states, and more specifically the constitutions and civic rights they anchor, are on the verge of destruction, about to be superseded, and indeed already superseded, by supranational institutions such as the EU, the UN, WHO and the IMF. And as we meet this evening, the Lisbon Treaty has already come into force, which will mean a drastic reduction in our civic rights. We're now in a sort of situation comparable to Nazi Germany in 1933. We haven't yet seen the stormtroopers coming into this hall and breaking up this meeting, but how many months will it be till we've reached that point? That will be dependent on what we do in the next few weeks. Our economies and our societies are being engulfed in a series of artificially created crises, pandemics, global warming, credit crunches, in order to pave the way for the creation out of chaos of a new global institutions that allegedly can master these problems in a better way. The UN, WHO, IMF and EU, these are the abstract power structures that are being set up all around us by a banking cartel as vehicles of their control. Accountable and democratic institutions are to be replaced by bureaucracies run by officials working in compartmentalized hierarchical structures. And they're not going to govern us as much as they're going to set down rules about what we are permitted and not permitted to do. And Codex Alimentarius is an example which has just been discussed, where these bureaucrats and officials will determine what we eat and what vitamins we're allowed and how much nourishment is going to be in our food, and it's not going to be much. We're essentially going to be put on a starvation diet, and there's going to be no way we can circumvent these rules without having to pay fines. Now, the key factor in the success of this global banking cartel, or whatever you want to call them, in their control is their control of the corporate mainstream media. Now, I worked for a lot of publications, also The Guardian, so I know from first hand just how censored the media is, and that's what started me investigating alternative sources of information. That's why I started looking at InfoWars and other websites, because I could see how my reports were being censored when they touched on certain topics that related to the financial interests of this group, like the price of oil or the boreal forest or whatever. Immediately the censorship came down, even when reports were commissioned, and I couldn't get them through in any newspaper. Not in Germany, not in France, not in any country. And this was very different from my experience with other trivial reports, which I could get through without any problem. So I could see there's a centralized system of censorship in our media. The media has unfortunately become an instrument by which this group can conceal and hide the nature of their activities and the existence of the monolithic and ruthless conspiracy in broad daylight. In order to get people to keep on tuning in, watching the TV or whatever, they've developed very sophisticated propaganda techniques, which includes giving a bit of truthful information, giving a bit of accurate criticism, so that people think they are getting an accurate source of information. The modern mainstream media can saturate society with images, with expert opinions, with sound bites, and so shape our perception and attitudes towards events. The mainstream media can create the impression there is a consensus about how to tackle a problem, when there is no consensus, and this allows the political decision-making process to be shifted from Parliament to the media sphere. We have a problem like the swine flu, mass forced vaccinations or mass vaccinations are suggested by the media as a solution, and that is then the policy that the government adopts. The swine flu pandemic, like global warming and 9/11, needs to be understood as a consciously crafted media event, as the product of a skillful media campaign, such as the kind that is staged all the time in the newspapers and TV in Europe and the USA for commercial and political purposes. The true target of the swine flu campaign is not that which is blown up, the swine flu virus. That is just a stage prop. The real target is you, the audience watching at home. The goal is to have a psychological effect on you. In fact, it's to terrorize you and to motivate you to go and take the swine flu vaccine, as well as to accept drastic restrictions on your constitutional rights and even to allow martial law. Now, just how real the possibility of forced vaccination is even here is being underlined by the fact that there was a parliamentary briefing note published on November the 12th, I think, which said that there is a legal basis for making these swine flu vaccinations compulsory in the UK. Now, that was only a month ago, so this is the direction we're heading in. The modern mainstream media makes it possible to distribute and disseminate powerful images instantly around the entire globe. We have pictures of children in hospital, we have patients on respirators, pigs in the mud, and all of these images can make the swine flu seem omnipresent and lethal when in fact there's no real pandemic at all. I think that's been clear to most people virtually since the day the swine flu first appeared in Mexico City in April. Only 8,000 people have died from it, according to the World Health Organization's own figures. I think it's probably 8,300 by now. That is just a fraction of the number of people who die from the seasonal flu every single year, which is 500,000 according to the World Health Organization. Now, in California, just 2% of the suspected swine flu cases were confirmed to be actual swine flu after lab tests were done. In the UK, only about 15,000 cases of swine flu were confirmed by laboratory tests to be swine flu, according to information obtained through the Freedom of Information Act by Ian McGilvery. Another request that he put in revealed that the Scottish government has more or less reclassified all the seasonal flu deaths as swine flu deaths. So this year, there's been no seasonal flu deaths at all in Scotland, as there usually are every single year. But all of a sudden, there's been a huge number of swine flu deaths. I think it's now 48 or 50 or whatever. So what they've done is just shift all the seasonal flu deaths into the swine flu death column to try and persuade you that there is a pandemic when there is no such thing. A recent study by the Harvard University concluded that this swine flu pandemic is in fact probably milder even than the average seasonal flu. In fact, to justify declaring a pandemic level emergency 6, the World Health Organization had to loosen the criteria in April. Lethality was no longer required. The emergence of a new virus to which we have no immunity was no longer necessary. All that was required was this speed of transmission in 2 different WHO zones. And this was enough for a pandemic level 6 emergency to be declared in June. And this means basically the globe is put on red alert, martial law, kind of, absolute highest level of alert we're now under because of this swine flu. Every single country that is signed up to the World Health Organizations, which is, I think, 193 countries, are now obliged to implement these emergency pandemic regulations that WHO issues. But as I say, the swine flu pandemic is a media event which is just being put out there to get your attention. It's to influence your opinion, to persuade you to get this vaccine. But the real danger is actually from the vaccine. the vaccine is